This happened in northern Scandinavia in the late 80s, in a part of the country that is mostly covered in dense pine forest. On the highway between cities in this part of the country, you do come across the occasional villages and secluded houses, but there are stretches that seem to go on forever with only pine trees as far as you can see. A young girl, in her early 20s, was taking a motor coach home after being on a trip down south, presumably visiting friends or relatives. This happened just as winter was approaching, and it was freezing outside after nightfall. This girl lived in one of these really small communities that you pass along the highway, but during the bus trip she fell asleep and missed her stop. Looking at her watch, she realized that they'd passed it only recently, and that if she were to get off she would be able to walk back in approximately 3 hours. Either that, or get off in the next city where she didn't know anyone or had any place to stay. She explained all this to the bus driver, who pulled off at the next parking space and let her off. That was the last time anyone saw her. Almost 15 years later, long after the search for her had been given up, she was stumbled upon by a hiker. Her dead body was found tied to a tree, well over an hour's walk from the road into the dense, almost impassable forest. The autopsy showed no signs of physical violence of any kind. Someone had just left her there, alive. The hiker who found the body was a seasoned outdoorsman named Eric. He had spent countless hours exploring the vast, untouched wilderness of northern Scandinavia. On that fateful day, he had ventured deeper into the forest than ever before, driven by a sense of adventure and a desire to escape the mundane routines of city life. As he pushed through the dense underbrush, he noticed something unusual. A faint glimmer of color caught his eye, starkly contrasting with the monotonous greens and browns of the forest. Curiosity piqued, he approached the anomaly. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Tied to a towering pine tree was the skeletal remains of a human being. The body was still clad in tattered remnants of clothing, now faded and worn by the elements. Eric's heart raced as he realized the grim significance of his discovery. He quickly marked the location and rushed back to the nearest village to alert the authorities. Detective Anderson was a veteran investigator with over 3 decades of experience. He had seen his fair share of gruesome crimes, but this case was different. The sheer isolation of the crime scene and the lack of any apparent motive made it one of the most perplexing cases he had ever encountered. Anderson arrived at the scene with a team of forensic experts. The body was carefully examined, and the surrounding area was meticulously searched for any clues. The autopsy revealed that the victim had died from exposure and dehydration, but there were no signs of physical trauma. It was as if someone had simply left her there to die. The identity of the victim was soon confirmed through dental records. Her name was Elsa, a young woman who had gone missing almost 15 years ago. The news of her discovery sent shockwaves through the small community where she had lived. Anderson began to piece together the events leading up to Elsa's disappearance. He interviewed the bus driver who had let her off that fateful night. The driver, now retired, recalled the incident vividly. He remembered Elsa's calm demeanor as she explained her situation and her decision to walk back to her village. He had offered to drive her to the next city, but she had insisted on getting off. The detective also spoke to Elsa's family and friends. They described her as a kind and adventurous young woman who loved the outdoors. She had been visiting friends in the south and was returning home when she disappeared. Her family had searched for her for years, but eventually, they had to accept that she was gone. As Anderson delved deeper into the case, he began to uncover strange inconsistencies. Elsa's friends mentioned that she had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her trip. She had been receiving mysterious phone calls and seemed anxious and distracted. When asked about it, she had brushed it off as nothing important. Anderson's investigation led him to a small cafe in the village where Elsa had lived. The cafe was a popular gathering spot for the locals, and Elsa had been a regular customer. The owner of the cafe, a kind-hearted woman named Maria, remembered Elsa well. She recalled that Elsa had been receiving phone calls at the cafe, which was unusual since most people in the village had their own phones. Maria described the caller as a man with a deep, raspy voice. He would call every few days, and Elsa would always take the call in a private corner of the cafe. After each call, she would seem even more anxious and distracted. Maria had tried to ask Elsa about the calls, but she had always changed the subject. Anderson's interest was piqued. He decided to trace the phone calls, but it was a daunting task. The cafe's phone records from 15 years ago were long gone, and there was no way to track the calls directly. However, Anderson had a hunch that the caller might have been someone local, someone who knew Elsa well. Anderson began to investigate the locals who had known Elsa. He spoke to her neighbors, her former classmates, and even her childhood friends. One name kept coming up: Johann, a reclusive man who lived on the outskirts of the village. Johann had been known to have a crush on Elsa, but she had never reciprocated his feelings. Johann was a loner who kept to himself. He was known for his eccentric behavior and his love for the forest. He would often disappear for days at a time, venturing deep into the woods. Anderson decided to pay Johann a visit. Johann's cabin was tucked away in a secluded part of the forest. As Anderson approached, he noticed that the cabin was in a state of disrepair. The windows were boarded up, and the door was locked. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He decided to take a look around the property. As he walked around the cabin, he noticed a small shed in the back. The shed was locked, but Anderson managed to pick the lock. Inside, he found a collection of old photographs and letters. Among them was a photograph of Elsa, taken just before she disappeared. There were also letters addressed to Elsa, written in a shaky handwriting that matched Johann's. Anderson returned to the village and began to search for Johann. He asked around, but no one had seen him in days. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Anderson knew that Johann was the key to solving the mystery of Elsa's disappearance. He decided to stake out Johann's cabin, hoping that he would eventually return. Days turned into weeks, and Anderson's patience was wearing thin. One night, as he sat in his car watching the cabin, he noticed a faint light in the distance. It was coming from deep within the forest. He grabbed his flashlight and set off in the direction of the light. As he approached, he saw a figure standing by a small campfire. It was Johann. Anderson approached cautiously, his hand on his gun. Johann turned to face him, his eyes wild and haunted. "Johann, I need to talk to you about Elsa," Anderson said, his voice steady. Johann's eyes widened in fear. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he stammered. "I just wanted to talk to her, to make her understand." Anderson listened as Johann confessed to following Elsa that night. He had been watching her from a distance, waiting for the right moment to approach her. When she got off the bus, he had followed her into the forest, hoping to talk to her alone. But something had gone wrong. Elsa had panicked and tried to run away. In his desperation, Johann had tied her to the tree, hoping to calm her down. But he had left her there, too afraid to face the consequences of his actions. Johann was arrested and charged with Elsa's murder. The news of his confession sent shockwaves through the small community. Elsa's family was devastated, but they finally had the closure they had been seeking for so long. Anderson reflected on the case, haunted by the senseless tragedy of it all. He thought about the young woman who had been left to die in the cold, dark forest, and the man who had been driven to madness by his own obsession. It was a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of even the most peaceful communities. As the years passed, the memory of Elsa's disappearance faded, but the forest remained a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its depths. The dense pine trees stood tall and unyielding, guarding the secrets of the past and the mysteries that would forever remain unsolved. In the quiet aftermath of the blind crashing to the floor, my heart pounded so loudly in my chest that it felt like it might burst. I was frozen, my breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. The room was now partially illuminated by the cold, silver light of the full moon, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered with the swaying of the trees outside. The storm seemed to have momentarily subsided, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I slowly turned my gaze towards the window, my eyes widening as I took in the sight before me. The glass was streaked with rain and flecked with mud, but there was no sign of whatever had cast that monstrous shadow. The tree beside the house, which usually provided a comforting rustle of leaves, now seemed menacing, its branches like gnarled fingers reaching out towards my window. I mustered the courage to take a step forward, my feet bare against the cold wooden floor. I leaned towards the window, squinting to see through the gloom. The backyard was a churning mess of muddy water, the half-dug pool reflecting the moonlight like a grotesque mirror. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from one shadow to the next, expecting to see anything that would explain the terrifying events of the past few minutes. But there was nothing. Just the empty yard, the storm-tossed trees, and the eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It was just the storm, I told myself. Just the wind and the rain playing tricks on my imagination. Just as I was about to turn away from the window, I saw it. A faint, flickering light in the corner of the yard, near the edge of the dugout pit. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it might be a trick of the light, but the glow remained, steady and unwavering. My curiosity piqued, I decided to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand, its beam cutting through the darkness as I made my way downstairs. The house was quiet, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder. I tiptoed past my parents' bedroom, not wanting to wake them, and slipped out the back door. The storm had picked up again, the rain pelting down in sheets. I pulled my jacket tight around me, the collar turned up against the wind. The flashlight beam bounced off the puddles, casting eerie reflections that seemed to dance and twist. I made my way towards the edge of the pit, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the glow, I realized it was coming from a small, circular object half buried in the mud. I knelt down, my fingers brushing against the cold, wet earth as I dug it out. It was a small, intricately carved stone, about the size of my palm. The carvings were unlike anything I had ever seen, swirling patterns and strange symbols that seemed to shift and change in the light. I held the stone up to the flashlight, examining it more closely. The glow seemed to intensify, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I felt a strange sensation, like a tingling in my fingertips, spreading up my arm and into my chest. It was as if the stone was alive, resonating with some ancient, forgotten power. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the yard, so strong it nearly knocked me off my feet. The trees groaned and creaked, their branches thrashing against each other. The rain lashed against my face, stinging my skin. I clutched the stone tightly, feeling a surge of fear and exhilaration. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm subsided. The wind died down, the rain slowed to a gentle patter, and the night was filled with an eerie calm. I looked up at the sky, the clouds parting to reveal the full moon, its light casting a silver glow over the yard. I stood there for a moment, the stone still clutched in my hand, feeling a sense of awe and wonder. Whatever had happened that night, whatever had cast that monstrous shadow and sent the blind crashing to the floor, it was gone now. And in its place was this strange, glowing stone, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. I made my way back to the house, the stone tucked safely in my pocket. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The night's events had left me shaken, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, the stone in my hand, its glow casting a soft light on the walls. I decided to keep the stone a secret, at least for now. I didn't want to worry my parents, and I wasn't sure they would believe me if I told them what had happened. I hid the stone in a small box in my closet, vowing to keep it safe until I could figure out what it was and where it had come from. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to school, did my homework, and helped my parents around the house, all the while keeping the stone hidden in my closet. But every night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about it. The glow, the carvings, the strange sensation it had given me, it was all so mysterious and intriguing. One night, about a week after the storm, I decided to take the stone out again. I waited until my parents were asleep, then crept downstairs to the living room. I sat on the couch, the stone in my hand, its glow casting a soft light on the walls. I examined it more closely, tracing the carvings with my fingertips. As I did, I felt that same tingling sensation, spreading up my arm and into my chest. But this time, it was stronger, more intense. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over me. And then, suddenly, I was somewhere else. I was standing in a vast, open field, the grass swaying gently in the breeze. The sky was a deep, vibrant blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds. In the distance, I could see a group of people, dressed in strange, colorful robes. They were gathered around a large stone altar, chanting and dancing. I walked towards them, feeling a sense of awe and wonder. As I approached, one of the figures turned to face me. It was an old man, his face weathered and lined with age. He smiled at me, his eyes kind and wise. "Welcome, "Child," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "We have been waiting for you." I looked around, confused. Waiting for me? But how did I get here? The old man chuckled. "The stone brought you here. It is a powerful artifact, a bridge between worlds. You are one of the chosen, destined to wield its power." I looked down at the stone in my hand, its glow pulsing gently. "But I don't understand. What am I supposed to do with it?" The old man's smile faded, his expression turning serious. "The stone is a tool, a weapon against the darkness that threatens our world. You must learn to use it, to harness its power and protect those who cannot protect themselves." I felt a chill run down my spine. The darkness? You mean, like what I saw that night? The shadow on my window? The old man nodded. "Yes. The darkness takes many forms, but it is always seeking to consume and destroy. You must be vigilant, always on guard against its influence." I looked around at the people gathered around the altar, their faces filled with hope and determination. I felt a sense of purpose, a calling deep within me. I knew that I had to do this, that I had to learn to use the stone and protect my world from the darkness. The old man placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You are not alone in this, child. We will guide you, teach you all that you need to know. But you must be strong, and you must be brave." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I will. I promise." The old man smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Then let us begin." And so, my journey began. Over the next few weeks, I spent every night in that field, learning from the old man and the others. They taught me how to harness the power of the stone, how to use it to see into the shadows and sense the presence of darkness. They showed me ancient rituals and incantations, passed down through generations, designed to ward off evil and protect the innocent. I kept my training a secret from my parents, knowing they wouldn't understand. I would wait until they were asleep, then creep downstairs to the living room, the stone in my hand. And every night, I would find myself in that field, surrounded by my newfound mentors, learning and growing stronger. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice changes in myself. I was more confident, more sure of myself. I no longer feared the darkness, but embraced it, knowing that I had the power to overcome it. I felt a sense of purpose, a calling that drove me to be better, to be stronger. But with that purpose came a burden. I knew that I was one of the chosen, destined to protect my world from the darkness. And I knew that the darkness was always out there, always seeking to consume and destroy. I had to be vigilant, always on guard, always ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. One night, as I sat in the living room, the stone in my hand, I felt a sudden surge of energy. The glow intensified, pulsing with an urgent rhythm. I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar wave of dizziness wash over me. And when I opened them, I was standing in a dark, foreboding forest. The trees towered above me, their branches intertwined to form a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the only sound was the distant hoot of an owl. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that something was wrong, that the darkness was near. I clutched the stone tightly, feeling its power coursing through me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. And then, I heard it, a low, menacing growl, echoing through the forest. I turned to face the sound, my eyes scanning the darkness. And then, I saw it, a massive, hulking figure, its eyes glowing with an eerie red light. It was a creature unlike any I had ever seen, a monstrous beast born of the darkness. I felt a surge of fear, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the power of the stone. I raised my hand, the stone glowing brightly, and began to chant the incantations I had been taught. The creature snarled, its eyes narrowing as it lunged towards me. But I was ready. I dodged to the side, the stone's power guiding my movements. I could feel the darkness within the creature, a writhing, twisted mass of evil. I focused my energy, channeling the stone's power into a blazing beam of light. The creature howled in pain as the light struck it, its form writhing and contorting. I kept the beam focused, pouring all of my energy into it. And then, with a final, ear-splitting scream, the creature dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had done it. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. I felt a sense of pride, of accomplishment. But I also knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be many more challenges ahead. As I made my way back to the field, the old man and the others were waiting for me. They greeted me with smiles and words of praise, their eyes filled with pride. I knew that I had proven myself, that I was truly one of the chosen. And so, my journey continued. I spent every night in that field, learning and growing stronger. I faced many more challenges, many more battles against the darkness. But with each victory, I grew more confident, more sure of myself. I knew that I had the power to overcome anything, to protect my world from the darkness that threatened to consume it. Years passed, and I grew older. I moved away from home, started a family of my own. But I never forgot my calling, my purpose. I kept the stone hidden, always ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And I knew that, no matter what, I would always be one of the chosen, destined to protect my world from the darkness. And so, my story comes full circle. From that terrifying night as an 8-year-old boy, to the battles and victories that followed, I have learned and grown, becoming stronger and more resilient. I have faced the darkness and emerged victorious, time and time again. And I know that, no matter what challenges lie ahead, I will always be ready to face them, to protect my world from the shadows that seek to consume it. For I am one of the chosen, a guardian of the light. And I will never let the darkness win. I grew up in a tiny town in northern Ontario. Every Friday, most of the neighborhood would gather in Jeanette and Emile's kitchen and tell stories for hours. I was only 5 or 6, the only kid on the block, so I'd usually read or play with my toys in one of the 2 guest bedrooms until I fell asleep. One night, I couldn't sleep because I could hear a baby crying. I came out into the kitchen, and complained to my mom. She told me to go back to sleep, but Jeanette, an experienced grandmother at the time, pulled a cookie out from the cookie jar and sent me to the living room to watch TV instead. Because of the way the house was laid out, the living room was right next to the kitchen, and I could hear the adults talking. I'm 22 now, in Texas, and it still creeps me the fuck out. When we first moved here, Jeanette started, there was a cross hanging up in the guest room. We're not really religious, and there was a lot of other crap from the old donors hanging up, so we took it all down. Their bedroom was in the basement, closest to the heater, and the kitchen, living room and guest rooms were all upstairs. We used to hear something running around upstairs, like a kid, eh? We thought it was just the dog, or the cat. But one weekend, Emile took the dogs hunting and the cat wouldn't come in that night. So I was downstairs, alone, and I heard the footsteps. I came up to investigate, and I could hear a baby crying. Now, the neighbors were too far apart for it to be one of their kids. And their house backed up into a field that went on for miles and miles. She was confused, and wound up calling the cops because the baby just would not stop crying. The OPP came, a grizzled older guy and his partner, and the older man remembered the house from when he'd been called there 3 years ago when the Harrison's toddler was found dead in its crib. They searched the yard and the house, but didn't hear anything. Offhandedly, they suggested she find the cross, and put it back on the wall. She did. And she never heard the baby again. When my mother went in to get my stuff so we could leave, she realized that when I was playing, I'd knocked the small cross off the wall. As I sat in the living room, the cookie crumbling in my hand, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The TV was on, but I wasn't really watching it. My ears were tuned to the conversation in the kitchen, every word sinking into my young mind like a stone into a dark pond. I could hear the adults murmuring, their voices low and serious. The story Jeanette told was like a shadow creeping into the room, making the warmth of the fireplace seem distant and cold. I remember looking around the living room, my eyes scanning the familiar furniture and decorations. Everything seemed normal, but there was an undercurrent of unease, like the room itself was holding its breath. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out like an eternity. I could feel the weight of the house around me, the creaks and groans of the old wood taking on a sinister tone. As the night wore on, the adults continued to share stories, each one more chilling than the last. I heard tales of strange occurrences in the woods, of ghostly figures seen at the edge of the fields, and of unexplained noises in the dead of night. Each story added to the growing sense of dread that had settled over me. I tried to focus on the TV, but the flickering images did little to distract me from the eerie atmosphere. Eventually, the conversation in the kitchen turned to lighter topics, and the tension in the room began to ease. But the story of the crying baby and the cross stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind like a dark secret. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the moment when I would be alone and vulnerable. As the night wore on, I must have dozed off on the couch, because the next thing I knew, my mother was gently shaking me awake. "Come on, sweetie," she said softly, "it's time to go home." I rubbed my eyes and stood up, feeling groggy and disoriented. The living room was dark now, the TV turned off and the only light coming from the kitchen. I could hear the adults saying their goodbyes, their voices warm and friendly. But as we walked out the front door and into the cold night air, I couldn't help but glance back at the house, my eyes drawn to the upstairs window of the guest room. For a moment, I thought I saw a faint glow, like the flicker of a candle, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. I shivered and hurried after my mother, the crunch of gravel under our feet the only sound in the still night. The walk home was short, but it felt like an eternity. The darkness seemed to press in around us, the shadows stretching out like long, bony fingers. I clung to my mother's hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, its breath hot on the back of my neck. When we finally reached our house, I breathed a sigh of relief. The warm light spilling out from the windows was a welcome sight, and I rushed inside, eager to leave the darkness behind. But as I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, I couldn't help but think about the story Jeanette had told. The image of the crying baby and the cross haunted my dreams, turning them into a twisted landscape of fear and uncertainty. Over the years, I tried to forget about that night, to push the memory of the crying baby and the cross to the back of my mind. But it always lingered, a dark shadow that followed me wherever I went. As I grew older, I began to question the reality of what I had heard. Was it just a story, a tale told to scare a young child? Or was there something more sinister at work, a dark force that had taken root in that old house? I never found the answers to those questions, but the memory of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of the unknown and the unseen. And as I sit here now, thousands of miles away from that tiny town in northern Ontario, I can't help but wonder if the crying baby is still there, its ghostly wails echoing through the empty halls of Jeanette and Emil's house. The years passed, and I moved away from that small town, seeking a life far removed from the eerie memories of my childhood. I found myself in Texas, a world away from the cold winters and dense forests of northern Ontario. The sun was hot, the landscape vast and open, and the people friendly and welcoming. It was a stark contrast to the isolated, close-knit community I had grown up in. But no matter how far I traveled or how much time passed, the memory of that night in Jeanette and Emil's house never faded. It was like a dark stain on my soul, a constant reminder of the unknown and the unseen. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, to focus on the present and the future, but it always lingered, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. One day, while browsing through an old bookstore in downtown Austin, I stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound volume tucked away in a corner. The title, Ghostly Encounters of the North, caught my eye, and I couldn't help but pick it up. As I flipped through the pages, my heart began to race. There, in black and white, was a story that mirrored the one Jeanette had told all those years ago. The book described a similar incident in a small town not far from where I had grown up. A family had moved into an old house and began to hear the cries of a baby at night. They searched the house and the surrounding area but found nothing. Eventually, they discovered that a cross had been removed from one of the rooms, and when they replaced it, the crying stopped. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the words, the memory of that night in Jeanette and Emil's kitchen rushing back to me. It was as if the story had followed me, a ghostly echo of the past that refused to be silenced. I bought the book and took it home, determined to uncover the truth behind the tale. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper into the history of the region, searching for any connection between the story in the book and the one Jeanette had told. I spent hours in the library, poring over old newspapers and records, looking for any mention of the Harrison family or the tragic death of their toddler. What I found was chilling. The Harrison family had indeed lived in the house before Jeanette and Emil, and their toddler had died under mysterious circumstances. The official report stated that the child had suffocated in its crib, But there were whispers of something more sinister at play. Some believed that the house was cursed, that a dark force had taken root within its walls and claimed the life of the innocent child. As I read through the accounts, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The parallels between the story in the book and the one Jeanette had told were too striking to be mere coincidence. It was as if the house itself was trying to tell me something, to warn me of the danger that lurked within its walls. I decided to reach out to Jeanette, hoping that she might be able to shed some light on the mystery. It had been years since I had last seen her, but I managed to track down her phone number through an old friend. When I called, she sounded surprised but pleased to hear from me. "I was wondering if you remembered that story you told me when I was a kid," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About the crying baby and the cross." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Jeanette sighed. "I remember," she said softly. "I never forgot that night." We talked for a while, catching up on the years that had passed and reminiscing about the old days. But the conversation always circled back to the story of the crying baby. Jeanette told me that she and Emile had eventually sold the house and moved away, unable to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over them. "We never heard the baby again after we put the cross back up," she said. "But there was always something off about that house. Like it was watching us, waiting for something." I told her about the book I had found and the similarities between the story it contained and the one she had told. Jeanette listened intently, her voice growing more serious with each passing moment. "I always knew there was something more to that story," she said. "But I never wanted to believe it. I thought if we just ignored it, it would go away." As we talked, I began to realize that the story of the crying baby was more than just a tale told to scare a young child. It was a warning, a reminder of the dark forces that lurked in the shadows, waiting for the moment when we were most vulnerable. I thanked Jeanette for her time and hung up the phone, my mind racing with thoughts of the past and the present. I knew that I couldn't ignore the story any longer, that I had to find out the truth behind the crying baby and the cross. Over the next few months, I continued my research, delving deeper into the history of the house and the Harrison family. I spoke to old friends and neighbors, anyone who might have information about the events that had taken place all those years ago. What I discovered was a tangled web of secrets and lies, a dark history that had been buried beneath the surface of that small town. The Harrison family had been plagued by tragedy long before the death of their toddler. There were stories of strange occurrences in the house, of ghostly figures seen at the edge of the woods, and of unexplained noises in the dead of night. Some believed that the house was cursed, that a dark force had taken root within its walls and was slowly consuming the family from within. As I pieced together the fragments of the past, I began to see a pattern emerging. The house seemed to be a magnet for tragedy, a place where darkness and despair were drawn like moths to a flame. And at the center of it all was the crying baby, a ghostly echo of the past that refused to be silenced. I knew that I had to return to the house, to confront the darkness that had haunted me for so long. It was a daunting task, but I couldn't ignore the pull of the past any longer. I had to find out the truth, no matter what the cost. The journey back to Northern Ontario was a long one, both physically and emotionally. As I drove through the familiar landscape, the memories of my childhood came rushing back to me. The small town seemed unchanged, frozen in time like a photograph from a distant past. When I finally arrived at the house, I felt a chill run down my spine. It looked the same as I remembered, the old wooden peeling paint a stark contrast to the modern world outside. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door creaked open as I pushed it, the hinges groaning in protest. The inside of the house was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me, the shadows stretching out like long, bony fingers. I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The guest room was just as I remembered it, the small cross still hanging on the wall. I stood there for a moment, my eyes scanning the room, searching for any sign of the darkness that had haunted me for so long. And then I heard it. A soft, faint cry, like the distant echo of a baby's wail. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the room like a ghostly chorus. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, the chill of the unknown sending shivers down my spine. I knew that I had to act quickly, that I had to find a way to silence the crying baby once and for all. I reached out and touched the cross, my fingers tracing the cool metal. And as I did, the crying stopped, the room falling silent once more. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house seemed to sigh around me, the darkness retreating like a tide. I knew that I had done what I had come to do, that I had confronted the darkness that had haunted me for so long. As I made my way back downstairs and out into the cold night air, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The weight of the past had been lifted from my shoulders, the shadows of the unknown banished to the corners of my mind. I knew that I would never forget the story of the crying baby and the cross, but I also knew that I had finally found the strength to let it go. The drive back to Texas was a long one, but it was filled with a sense of peace and closure. I knew that I had done what I had set out to do, that I had confronted the darkness of my past and emerged stronger for it. And as I crossed the border and left northern Ontario behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the journey that had led me there. The years have passed, and I have moved on with my life, the memories of that small town and the crying baby fading into the distant past. But every now and then, when the night is dark and the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but think back to that night in Jeanette and Emil's kitchen, to the story that had haunted me for so long. And I know that, no matter where I go or what I do, the memory of the crying baby and the cross will always be with me, a constant reminder of the unknown and the unseen, of the dark forces that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the moment when we are most vulnerable. But I also know that I have the strength to face them, to confront the darkness and emerge stronger for it. And so, I continue on, my journey through life, a constant battle between the light and the dark, the known and the unknown. But I know that, no matter what challenges lie ahead, I have the courage to face them, to stand tall in the face of adversity and emerge victorious. For I am a survivor, a warrior of the light, and I will never let the darkness consume me.